So let's get started. I'm going to sit down here at the table with Dave, and we're going to find out a little bit about Dave first. You have your own mic there, Dave?
I do.
So, Dave, who are you? Where do you come from? What have you done? Why are you here?
Why am I here? I'm Admiral Stockdale of the day, I guess, if we're political junkies. Well, I'm here because I like to explore Zinfandel, and this is a chance for me, of course, to taste so many different wines in a course of a few days and sort of re-immerse myself. For me, it's a little bit of a return, because my wife and I discovered our love of wine early in our relationship, before we had kids, back in the 80s when we were visiting California. And one of the wines that we quickly became interested in was Zinfandel. And it was a lot of fun to explore back in the late 80s, early 90s. And we loved it because of its variety. We liked the concept of old vines. And as we read a little bit about wine, we realized that we found the story of Zinfandel as California's grape. So I don't know whether that was an early precursor to my drink local emphasis as a writer. But after that, when I started writing as a way to learn about wine, it became a good way to spend all my annual leave and all my vacations in wine country.
There you go. You became an enotourist, as it were. So not only became an enotourist, but you became an eno-writer, and you obviously write well. I certainly enjoy your articles. You've written a number of them. How many articles have you written about Zinfandel?
Oh, gee, I should have probably gone back and counted them. I write 52 columns a year for the Washington Post as a freelance writer for them. And that's been now for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in October. So I haven't written for many other publications during those 10 years. That keeps me busy. But I do try to write I've written certainly a few articles about Zinfandel over the years, and I've peppered some Zinfandel recommendations. I also recommend 5 wines a week.
Do you feel like Zinfandel is underserved by wine writers?
Probably, I don't know. Probably you could make an argument that everything is underserved by wine writers. And by that I mean, we're kind of like the radar at the airport. We're going like this, and every now and then, bloop, Zinfandel, bloop, Cabernet, bloop, And so we don't necessarily focus on one area for a long time. And that's why something like this, for me to re-immerse myself in it and in the story, is always worthwhile.
So what do you think the story is? As a writer, as an observer from DC, as somebody from the East Coast, what's your vision of the story? And has that story evolved? Do you have a new vision now that you've been here for a few days?
Well, I think from my perspective of exploring wine now for more than about 30 years, as I mentioned, I love the story of Zinfandel as the California grape. When I first fell in love with it, it was before we had made the connection with Primitivo and the other unpronounceables that you just mentioned. And
like
I remember
Zerlia Nuts Castellansky?
Can you say that at the end of the tasting?
We're going to find out.
And I remember when I got my first copy of Jancis Robinson's wine, my only copy of Jancis Robinson's wine grapes, and I said, well, A to Z, right? I went to look for Zinfandel, and I said, see what? Because I hadn't heard the
Tribby Drag, really?
Right. Well, Zinfandel's a much nicer name. I can't see going into a restaurant and asking for a glass of Tribby Drag. But maybe
tell them what you'd get. How about a little nice white Tribby Drag? Maybe we can transfer white Zinfandel to white Tribby Drag. What do you think? I think you should write that article.
Okay, well, maybe. And that's another thing that when I first got interested in it was right sort of at the end of the white Zinfandel. So at that point, you all were making the marketing thing that no, it's not a pink wine. It's a serious red wine. So that was really interesting to get into. And I just love the stories of you and others who searched the state for these old vine vineyards and made these wonderful concentrated wines from them. And over the time, of course, I think you asked how perceptions have evolved. Of course, Zinfandel became very popular for a while, and I think that the style became a little bit too much, and it's not just Zinfandel, I think wine in general moved towards overripeness, in my opinion, and with Zinfandel, that just became these dried fruit, pruny flavors or port-like flavors and really high alcohol. That, to me, as my radar went around like this, every time, and I would taste them and I'd say, oh, gee, I've kind of lost my initial thinking of Zinfandel. Part of that is me evolving as a wine taster, of course. And in Washington, we have East Coast palates, which means we're drinking a lot of international wines.
Like wines with no flavor and lots of acid.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say no flavor, but yeah. I do know several wine folks and sommeliers who are like, I'm an acid freak, give me a Riesling. Not that they wouldn't enjoy these wonderful Zinfandels either, of course. But, and I think now what I've seen and confirmed here over the past few years, and again, I think this is more than just Zinfandel, but that pendulum seems to be swinging back a little bit towards the middle. And you're finding, I'm tasting some that just are really wonderfully nuanced wines that just scream to be enjoyed with dinner, and I think that's terrific. And so that's the story for me stylistically with Zinfandel. And the others, I love the detective story of going back to these vineyards and doing the DNA testing and finding out exactly what you have in there and how much of it isn't really Zinfandel. But the field blends of it, I think, gives it a lot of the complexity to it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the real stories of Zinfandel, the ones that we've been investigating more, is this whole notion of field blends and how much those grapes make a difference to it and how they get selected for a particular site, which takes it back to sort of that European idea of terroir and place, because each place had its own characteristic blend of grapes. So do you think there's a future for Zinfandel? Do you think that this next gen group has anything to look forward to?
Well, I definitely think so. And I think one of the questions, and maybe the next chapter might be something that Rebecca was telling me about, the Heritage Vineyard and the effort to preserve the bloodlines of these old vines, because these vines from 1888 or 1920 or something, they're not going to last forever. And to take that material and plant new vineyards, you may not be able to call it old vine anymore, but if you take that, and I think, and that's why I think the DNA testing is very appropriate, you can preserve that field blend aspect of the new vineyards. And if you just plant Zinfandel, even if you plant a few clones of Zinfandel, you might not get the nuanced complexity that you get when you add some Carignan and Alicante Bouschet and the other grapes.
Well, thank you. That's, I think, a good note to end on, because we'll talk more about that during this discussion. Dave, thank you very much for your input and for your vision, and drink more Zinfandel.
I'm about to. I'm very thirsty now. Thank you.
I have to tell you that I tasted with Galoni recently, and he was tasting with a European who will be unnamed, and he said something about the acidity and the character of their wine, and she said to him, your palate has been spoiled by California.
No comment.